Welcome. It's nice to have you here. It's relax into health, wealth, and happiness. So you know what that means. Well, those who are here live know what it means, and then I have to give a little bit of instruction for people who happen upon this on YouTube. The intention of this meeting is what's called self-realization, which is to know the truth of yourself, which is peace, harmony, unconditional love, acceptance, freedom. And all the blessings flow from this at all levels. And you know this, then this does not mean it's not a negation of your worldly life, it's an enhancement of your worldly life. So that instead of unnecessary arguments and frustrations and quarrels and anger, fear, that you can live with a establishment in a knowledge of yourself as this ever-present peace and harmony, as a lived reality, not as an idea, not as some conceptual thing, but as something that you know directly. So that's the intention. And as I usually do, I'll suggest that this is possible for you by relaxing. And this relaxation is an active relaxation. It's not just to go to sleep, because I'm sure you've noticed that you've probably gone to sleep many times, and although it can solve many problems, it doesn't solve all the problems. So it's not that kind of relaxation that I'm talking about. It's an active relaxation that requires presence. And at first, presence seems to be effortful, usually because we're in the habit of actually being asleep, even when we think we're awake. And so to change that habit, to establish yourself in presence, at first it seems effortful, usually, not always, but sometimes, usually, it seems effortful because it's a change. So to change any habit requires that you are consciously choosing persistently what it is that you want. You have to be aware of the old habit. And that old habit in this case involves lots of tension and fighting and struggling, all within yourself, of course, externally too, but primarily the interest here is noticing this within yourself and just noticing all of these unnecessary efforts that are going on all the time, that are habitual, compulsory, and that are unconscious, or they have been unconscious up until they become conscious. So through this presence, through active relaxation, by being aware of yourself and choosing to let go, this does everything. It changes everything. It may not give a flashy experience, and oftentimes we are seduced by the idea that glamorous, flashy experiences are somehow inherently valuable. But it's not true. I mean, obviously, it's not true, because we've actually had plenty of those experiences, and they come and they go, and they don't necessarily leave us any better for having had the experience. So we need to, it will be valuable to let go of the notion that we need some sort of glamorous experience. You don't need to have some kind of far out psychedelic so-called spiritual experience in order to benefit in an authentic way in order to actually change the habit and establish yourself in the truth of who you are. So oftentimes it's said by people who are speaking on these kinds of subjects that, and rightfully, truthfully so, that you already are that which you seek. And this is true. You already are that. This is good news, because if you weren't, this would be very difficult, if not impossible. But the mistake that's then often made is there's an implication or an outright explicit suggestion that there's nothing that's possible or nothing that can be done or should be done, that there's no right effort at all. And I disagree with that. And so I propose here that there's useful effort, and then there's unhelpful effort. The vast majority of the effort is unhelpful. It's unconscious, and it maintains the habits that you don't want, which keep you locked into the struggle and the ignorance and confusion that generate all the suffering in your life. But as I've already pointed out, and I'll suggest again, changing that habit requires a choice. It requires that you actually have to consciously choose that, and that requires applying yourself, which is some effort. So we can use effort unconsciously in a very unhelpful way, which is what most people are doing most of the time, or we can use some small effort in a conscious way that is helpful to us when we know what that is, and we apply ourselves to it. So that's what the act of relaxation is. It's about continually observing yourself, noticing what it is that you are doing that is very unhelpful. This also, as I've often pointed out, so this will not be new to anybody who's heard me speak on this subject, it's also very helpful to have some clarity about what you actually want. Because if you don't know what you want, then you will tend to be all over the place. you won't have the persistence that's necessary. So this is often a good starting point, is to have some clarity about what you want. I can maybe give you a bit of a assistance with this, because if it's too open-ended, which I've often allowed it to be very open-ended, but if it's too open-ended, then maybe we take a long time and still have a great deal of confusion about what we really want. So I'll just, for the sake of this meeting presently, suggest to you what you really want is the peace of knowing who you are. And let me explain why that is. If you look at everything that you struggle with in your life, and that's kind of boils down to fear, resentment, anxiety, frustration, disappointment, anger, those kinds of things. Of course, we think it's about all kinds of other things, but all the things we think it's about really come down to those experiences, those subjective experiences. So we don't really suffer from a lack of money or a lack of respect from other people or whatever. We suffer from our own fear and resentment and so forth. So all of those things are that's what we're really struggling with in our lives. And all of that comes down to, if you look at it, just so take a look for yourself at your own experience presently. Don't just accept what I say is true, but look to see that it is true. in your own experience. So I'm confident that what I'm saying is true, but for it to be valuable for you, you have to actually look and confirm it for yourself. So all of these things that we're struggling with, they are based upon an ignorance of who we really are, because most of us identify as presently we're experiencing a waking state, unless you're experiencing this in a dream state or deep sleep state, but or if you're, well, anyway, we'll simplify. Okay, so you're experiencing this in a waking state. Hopefully you can agree with that. Although maybe I've lulled some people to sleep already, but if you're still awake, then you're experiencing this in the waking state. And so you have normally in the waking state, most people are in the habit of identifying with a particular character in the waking state, the one that we call me, right? So, and that me that you identify with consists of a body, a mind, a personality, a story about yourself. And so all of the struggles have to do with that identification. Just take a look and see that that's true. So if imagine for a moment that you didn't identify. Now, I'm not saying that you can make this happen necessarily. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but set that aside for the moment. It's irrelevant for the moment. Just imagine some miraculous scenario that somebody is, able to snap their fingers and suddenly you no longer were able to identify with this body, this mind, this personality, this story, any of the experiences associated with any of this character. I'm not saying that you know how to do that presently. I'm not saying that that will necessarily happen. I'm just saying hypothetically, imagine that that could happen. I don't know that maybe it's desirable, maybe it's undesirable. Set that aside also for the moment. Don't assume anything. I'm just saying hypothetically, just for the sake of this argument, to allow yourself to see what I'm pointing to here. Just imagine you suddenly find you can't identify with any of this. Now, what problems do you have? Hopefully you see there's no problems. There's an impossibility of any problems because all of the problems have to do with the identification with this character. So again, I'm not saying the character is wrong. I'm not saying the character is bad. I'm not saying it's false. I'm not saying anything about it at this point, other than just to point out that your identification with it is the key factor in all of your problems. And maybe it is, and maybe it's not possible to remove that identification. That's, again, for the time being, it doesn't matter. But just in theory, if it was somehow possible and it happened that you could no longer identify with any of this, and maybe that's hard to imagine exactly what that would be like, but just do your best, then can you see that you couldn't possibly have any problems? It would be a bit like watching a movie. So whatever's happening in the movie, you know that it has nothing to do with you. And so you don't experience any of those problems. The characters in the movie might experience all kinds of problems. They usually do. It's not a particularly interesting movie if they're not experiencing problems. But you're not experiencing any problems because you know that you're not that character in the movie. Now, I know sometimes you get very caught up and you start to sympathize, but nonetheless, when at the end of the movie, at the very least, you realize this has nothing to do with me, not my problems. So in a similar sort of way, if somehow it was like your life as you presently understand it, which you associate with this character in the waking state presently, if that identification somehow stopped and it was just like watching a movie, what problem would you have? And the answer clearly is none. Or at the very least, none of the problems that you presently believe that you have. Because again, all of those problems have to do with this character. Hopefully that's clear. Hopefully you can see that for yourself. Now, again, up to this point, none of this necessarily has any particular practical value. It's just sort of theoretical, but we'll get to how it has practical value. So don't worry, I'm not going to leave it theoretical. But hopefully then I've established and you've established for yourself that the problems that you have the linchpin is this identification with this character. And if somehow that linchpin came out, then whatever was happening would no longer be a problem for you, regardless of whether it's perceived as a problem for the character, because maybe the character involves all the habits and the thinking of the character. So maybe there's and maybe there's not a lingering perception of a problem happening in the mind that we associate with this character that we call me. But regardless, if all of that is still happening as if I'm watching a movie, then there's still no problem for you. So remember where I was going with all of this is just to suggest that what you really want, and again, you have to look for yourself to see the truth of this, because me saying it in and of itself doesn't do you any good. You have to actually see that it's true. So look for yourself. But I am suggesting to you that the problems that you have are all based on this ignorance of who you are. If you identify with this character and all the problems have to do with this character, then hence all your problems have to do with this fundamental ignorance of who you are. And the remedy thereby is to have the direct knowledge, the living knowledge of who you are, independent of the character, because this frees you from all of the problems. And when you're freed from all the problems, then you're free to put your attention on what it is that you really want, which is that freedom, that direct knowledge of who you are. But also, I would say, the qualities. I'm rolling my eyes only because the language is a bit tricky, and I'm sure many people could argue that I'm off in some dodgy territory with this, but we'll just say the qualities of who you are is this independent self are everything that you've ever actually aspired to. You just maybe didn't know it. Because again, when you identify as this character, then you can't help but frame all of the things that you want in contrast to what it is that you don't want. So, and what I mean by that is you say, oh, I really want unconditional love. That sounds really nice. But it's because you're perceiving that you're lacking that presently. So, you're referencing something, some sort of sense of deficiency in the character presently, a sense of deficiency in the story of the character, where this character can't seem to have, adequately loving, accepting, respectful relationships with others or whatever. And so then there's a desire for a remedy to that. And the remedy is maybe framed as unconditional love, but it's actually referring back to this sense of deficiency. But when you're freed from that compulsive referencing of the deficient self, then you're free to directly perceive, experience, and recognize the truth of unconditional love that is already present as your true self. So that's why I'm saying this is the shortcut that I'm trying to provide, is just, what do you really want? You want unconditional love, the truth of unconditional love. Okay, so hopefully I have established that, and you have established that for yourself by looking and seeing that that's true. I don't think that there can be any good argument to that. I think that that's should be very clear, self-evident, right? That if you know unconditional love, like the truth of unconditional love, I mean, just again, maybe you have a difficult time presently imagining what that would really be like, but we'll get to that in a moment so you can directly experience it. But just if somehow you could imagine what that might be like, can you see that unconditional love offers you everything that you actually want? It fulfills everything. Because otherwise you're chasing after these things that come and go, right? And I'm not saying that you should deny the things that come and go, because yeah, it's not necessary. I mean, that's something that people do sometimes, and maybe that works sometimes for some people. It's a very challenging path, and it's somewhat rare that it works. I'm thinking like Ramana Maharshi, and I don't, when it works, it's not premeditated at all. It happens spontaneously, which is why it's impossible to emulate it successfully. But Ramana Maharshi, um, apparently, I mean, I was not there and I'm not him, so I can't say for sure, but apparently he entered into spontaneous samadhi and and never stopped. So there was no longer any, that character that he identified with, that identification apparently completely ceased at that, in, just completely ceased. Again, I'm not Ramana, and I wasn't there, so I can't say for sure, but apparently that is the case. So, but again, you can't successfully emulate that because it has to happen authentically, and it happens authentically when it does and not otherwise. Then we've got the case of Siddhartha, who became the Buddha, Shakyamuni. And so his story was that he attempted to emulate that, right? He attempted, go stand on one leg and eat nothing but roots from the forest. And that didn't work out well for him. So there's a, it's not necessary. It's not necessary to deny the world. It's not necessary to say, well, if I'm not this character, then I won't eat. It's really not necessary. And if that thought never occurred to you, good for you. I'm just mentioning it for those rare, unfortunate people among us, like myself, who that kind of thought would occur to, just to clear it up so that it doesn't, waste your time on that. So, just fine. Let attend to let the character attend to its needs and whatever. It's fine, no problem. But this unconditional love actually is what you want. And if you make the mistake, as most of us do, of believing that you are this character, then you believe that the desires and needs of the character are your desires and needs that need to, and that your okayness is dependent on the fulfillment of those things. In other words, and all those things are transient. So a very simple, obvious example is the body in general. There are exceptions to this, but overwhelmingly the body needs food, regularly, daily, if usually daily. I mean, obviously doesn't usually need food daily just for survival, but usually is asking for food daily and tends to work best to provide it with food daily for most people most of the time. I roll my eyes at that only just because I know no matter what I say, there's going to be somebody out there who's going to object to it. But bless you. When you're ready to, when you're ready to hear, you'll hear, and you won't fight. So there's no problem with those things, but the problem arises only when we think I need those things. I don't need those things. So it's not a problem to satisfy those desires, those transient desires, but to see that all those things, if I want to, I want to satisfy transient things, then then the satisfaction will be transient in nature, right? I eat today, I'm going to want to eat again tomorrow. That's not bad. It's not a problem. We don't need to make it into a problem, but it's helpful to recognize it for what it is, right? It's transient in its nature. So great, I'm hungry, I'll eat. But then I want to be intelligent and recognize tomorrow again I will want to eat, or 4 hours from now I will want to eat, or whatever. And so then to put it in its proper place and see it for what it is. Don't make the mistake of thinking this will satisfy my true deep desire, because then you're more likely to fall into the trap that Siddhartha fell into, where you think, if I'll solve this by denying that. No, it won't work unless it does, but chances of it working are very slim, so don't waste your time. But then if we can just start to put our attention on what actually will satisfy us, there can be some valuable progress in all this. So to see what is it I really want, it's unconditional love. And we could use other words to point to the same basic thing, but I'm just going to, for the sake of simplicity, I'll just say presently at least, unconditional love, and see that that is what satisfies you at the deepest level. Again, it's not necessarily going to satisfy the transient desires that come and go, because those continue to come and go. Even Ramana ate. So those things come and go. Fine, not a problem. But see, what is it that you really want? Unconditional love. That's what you really want. And see that that's a quality of who you really are. Okay, so I said that let's make this practical, connect it to your direct experience so that you can actually know this for yourself. So just take a moment right now and just be willing to let go. Just be willing to let go of everything just for the moment. You don't have to get rid of anything. You don't have to silence your mind. You don't have to get rid of any sensations. You don't have to like your experience. It doesn't have to be anything. Just be willing to let go of everything for a moment, including letting go of trying to change it, trying to control it, trying to insist that it should be a particular way. Just for one moment. Don't try to sustain it. Don't worry about sustaining it. Just for one instant, just let go. And everybody can do that. Everybody. It's absolutely, I'm certain that everybody can do that. Certain everybody can do that because that's happening all the time. In fact, it's impossible to hold on for any real duration. So if you just consciously choose to let go and attend to that, even if it's just for a split second, you might then be able to glimpse the truth of who you are who you actually are. So notice that who you are is the foundation. What you do depends on who you are. And when I say who you are, I don't mean your personality traits. I don't mean who you are as a body, a mind, any of that. I mean who you are fundamentally, being, existence is the prerequisite for everything else. It's the foundation. So who you are by definition is continuous. What you do changes. What you believe changes. What you think changes. What you feel changes. All those things change, constantly changing. Who you are is continuous, must be, because if it wasn't, then there would be no you at all. And you can just know this to be true because you know that you are continuous. You know that you're eternal, actually. Oh, well, language is funny because then people are going to object to that because they're going to try to make sense of it in a convoluted way. But what I mean is presently notice that you are, and notice that this being, this isness, this self that you are is timeless, formless. So it's didn't come and go. It wasn't here in the past and then it will be here in the future. It's ever present. Everything else is coming and going in this. So when you let go, then what remains? And again, I'm not saying that anything has to go away, but what I mean is for sure the one thing that remains, because everything else may come and go or will come and go as it does whenever it does. But the one thing that for sure remains is you being. Don't try to objectify that. Don't try to make that into some thing. But I'm saying just notice presence, existence, isness, awareness. This, you cannot lose it. It's an impossibility. You can't make it go away. No matter how hard you try, it's an impossibility. There's no way to make it go away because it's foundational. So when I say that, if you think, well, no, it could go away, then whatever you think I'm pointing to here, it's not that, because the thing that I'm pointing to is not a thing and it cannot go away. So just strip everything else away and notice that which remains. That's what I'm talking about. Now you might say, well, I'm not sure that's anything. Great. It's probably not anything. But just notice without it having to be a thing, there is presence. There is being, there is existence. Not your existence, because your existence presupposes that there's something to have it. But what I'm saying is when that thing that you think you are goes away, still this presence, this being exists, remains, is continuous, eternally, always. You can't lose it. You couldn't if you tried. It's a total impossibility. Why? Because everything else comes and goes in this, including the you that you think you are. The personality, the body, all the things come and go in this. This is the foundation. So again, just let go of everything, just for an instant. Just like you've been carrying a bag, a heavy load, and like you can't hold it any longer. Maybe you've had that experience. It's like you straining to hold it. Just let it go like that. You can do that with your whole life right now, just for one instant. Just let it go. And maybe you grasp at it again the next instant, but just for one instant, let it all go. Notice what a relief that is. And that offers you this glimpse to recognize that in this one instant of letting go completely, you remain. Not the you that you think you are, but you, the real you, presence, being. And notice this is totally unconditional. Being is totally unconditional. It doesn't have any conditions. It doesn't depend upon anything because all the conditions come and go in it. This is the thing that's here always, totally reliable. Whether you feel good or you feel bad, whether you think you're conscious or unconscious, awake or asleep, male, female, strong, weak, none of that matters in regard to this presence. This presence is always, always, always here. Good for good people and bad people and all, everything. Rocks, dogs, plants, everything. Because all of those things are coming and going in this. So all of those things that come and go are conditional, clearly, right? There are certain conditions for them. You can only the good feeling can only be there when the condition of good feeling is there. When the condition of bad feeling is there, then the good feeling is not there. Good feeling is conditional. Bad feeling is conditional. Everything's conditional except this presence. So don't make it complicated. It's very simple. It's my job to make things complicated by talking too much, but you can keep it simple. Notice all that I'm pointing to here again is just this active relaxation, just to be aware of yourself letting go. And to notice that is what remains is unconditional. So I call it unconditional love. Maybe the word love has too much baggage for some people, in which case you're free to drop it. But I find it helpful because love, first of all, it usually sounds nice, usually generates some sort of attractive sense in us, right? Like we're attracted to love, usually for most people. Again, there will be exceptions. But it's also, I think, truthful. I think that what we really mean by love when we're talking about love truthfully is we're talking about unconditional love, acceptance. It's that there's no rejection at all of what's essential. There might be rejection of something else, but no rejection of what's essential. Complete acceptance of the essence. To me, that's love. So it's unconditional love too, which is, I think, redundant. We could just say love, but just because true love is unconditional, but just to be explicit about it is unconditional love. And that to me, that's what this is. That's what this presence is. So when I say, let's say presence, consciousness, awareness, being, it's unconditional love. This is, I sincerely believe this is what everybody actually wants. Because again, what problem do you have when you, in this moment of this recognition of yourself as this unconditional love, there can't be any problem. So hopefully that has been established. Hopefully you've established that for yourself. As usual, a lot of words to get to something very simple. And once it's seen, hopefully very obvious, which is what you want is this unconditional love that's present always as the foundation and backdrop for everything, and that everything else is transient by its nature. That doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean we should reject it or deny it. It's also divine, so there's no problem with it. But it's just that normally we're so entranced by all that stuff, and then we come to think of ourselves as just some other object amid other objects, and that generates so much uh, strain, difficulty, disappointment, etc. And so it's very useful to momentarily, consciously let go and recognize that, oh, I am this unconditional love that's always already here. And this is what I most desire. This is the actual fulfillment of everything else. This is what gives me what I most deeply, truly want. So now, with that hopefully established, that that's what you really want and what it is and where it is and how who it is and how you have access to it, then the only question remains then, okay, well, now what? Right? So I can hopefully glimpse that, recognize the truth of it, but then the problem is, well, but how do I get that? Or we want to possess it, we want to get it, or how do I, and everything, you'll start to see everything that you try to do, it's a little bit wrong. No matter how you try to think about it, it's a little bit wrong, because all of this scheming and doubting and thinking that comes next is because we've again stepped into a false identity, a limited identity, let's put it that way, a limited identity, a transient identity. And now we're trying to figure out, how can this transient identity get that? Can't, because the transient identity comes and goes in that. But it's not totally hopeless. So I'm going somewhere with this, believe it or not. Because this is the trouble, is that a lot of the time I've heard people go so far as all of this, to say these kinds of things and point out these things and establish these points, but then it's just sort of, okay, and there you go, good luck to you. But that's I find that very frustrating. And so I don't want to do that to you. So I believe that there are useful ways that we can then work with all of this. But first and foremost, we have to have the direct experience and recognition of what we want truly, where it is, who it is, and all that, which is what I've sought to establish thus far. So hopefully you can recognize that in this moment, really in any moment, at least for one instant, it is possible to let go and recognize this unconditional love. And if you don't like that word, whatever you want to use, presence, awareness, openness, peace, spaciousness, existence, whatever is here now, unconditionally. And that is what you want. Because there's no problem. But then usually there's a return to the identification with the limited self, and then the struggles come again. Oh no, how do I solve all these problems in light of what I've just recognized? Is there any hope here? And I say there is, and we can work intelligently with all of this. And I suppose there are probably many ways to do that, because well, just because there are. So I'm not going to try and propose this is the only way, but it is a way, and it's a way that I'm going to talk about today, which is to recognize that this this limited identity is by definition limited. So it has a limited view. And it is if we act from that limited identity, trying to solve our problems, then we fall into this trap of what I often point out is trying to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. It won't work because we don't have the perspective or the leverage to be able to succeed in that. So it's like, knowing that knowing that it's very wise to recognize that you don't know everything. When you can acknowledge that, and when you can acknowledge that in moments you have glimpsed the totality, but you can't capture that totality into this limited identity. It's not going to happen. You can't do it. But you can acknowledge that totality has been glimpsed, and that in that moment of that glimpsing of that totality, there is a recognition of this vast intelligence, and that you can at least recognize in this moment of identifying with this limited identity that you're not presently conscious of that totality. So if you're trying to solve your problems at this level, you're trying to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You want to remind yourself of that, say, knock it off. This doesn't work. Now, you can then acknowledge, because you can know it's true, because you've had the direct experience of it, that you are, in fact, in truth, not the limited identity, but that vast, infinite intelligence. So through the filter of this mind, which is part and parcel of the limited identity, you don't know all of those things. But you are at a higher level, just to use a word to describe it, at a higher level, you are that infinite intelligence. So that infinite intelligence is working for the greater good. It's not against you. Couldn't be against you. In fact, you're the only one who's against you. You, as the limited identity, are the only one who's against you. Or at the very least, we could say that the infinite intelligence is definitely not against you. So when you're trying to solve your own problems at the level of the limited identity, you're trying to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you only make things worse for yourself. So the intelligent thing to do is to recognize and acknowledge, even if in this moment you're struggling to let go and recognize it directly, at the very least, you can acknowledge that there is this higher intelligence. And you can, at the very least, remember that you have known at some time and seen the truth that this higher intelligence is for you, not against you. And that it is by its nature vastly more intelligent than you are, has access to the totality, knows how to solve all your problems if only you will allow it. And so then with that knowledge, with that recognition, then you can pray. however you want to, whatever, whatever, however, whatever makes sense to you, whatever you can connect to sincerely, whether that's to a personal deity or to an impersonal deity or to a whatever, I don't care. Whatever works for you, because whatever works for you will work. But it's just to pray, please guide my life. I surrender to you, higher intelligence, and trust that whatever is happening is an expression of that unconditional love that is restoring my awareness of myself as that. And then trust. So, I hope that's not a big disappointment, because sometimes people want, more like technical steps and details, like the, 4-step process that they can write down on paper. And those things have relative value, but for those who really just want to have um, want something more effective that will give better results, this is it. Another word for it, I guess, is surrender, but it's intelligent surrender. It's not surrender like, I'll cross my fingers and hope. It's to have the direct experience of yourself as unconditional love. Please gift yourself that now if you haven't already. If you're not sure how, just let go of everything for an instant right now. Just for an instant, stop all the effort, stop all the strain, stop trying to figure it out, stop trying to solve your problems, stop trying to protect yourself, stop all of it just for one instant, just like that. Don't try to sustain it. And just notice what a tremendous relief that is. And notice that that relief is infinite. Notice that that relief is complete. It's complete relief. Now, the tendency will be to again identify with the limited identity, and then it seems like that relief has disappeared. Not a problem. All that's necessary for now is just to let go for an instant and recognize that in this one instant, there is infinite, complete relief. That is who you are at the higher level. And so that's the most essential thing, is to have that recognition directly, not as a thought, not as a belief, not as a religion, not as some superstition, but just to actually simply glimpse it for yourself now. You don't have to turn it into a belief. You may or may not. It's not necessary. But just to have that as an actual direct experience, that then it will allow you to refer to that so you can trust in the truth of it. So that's the requirement fundamentally. And then to recognize in your life that you're trying to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps over and over and over and over because of this identification with a limited identity that by definition does not have access to infinite intelligence, and so cannot solve its own problems, and is only going to make things worse because it thinks it knows lots of things, but at least half of what it thinks it knows is completely wrong, and the other half is mostly wrong. And so it's just going to make a mess of things. In case you haven't noticed, just tell the truth about your life and you'll see that that's just what's been going on. I'm trying to just get to the point, and so maybe that seems blunt. And I don't mean that to be harsh. I mean it lovingly. Just tell the truth finally. You don't have to do it anymore. You don't have to pretend like you've got it all figured out and you're understanding anything. What a relief that would be, wouldn't it? Just to stop all the false pretense. just finally admit, boy, I've really been confused and struggling and made a mess of things, and I'm not even sure about anything. Okay, good news. You don't have to. It's not your job. It's the job of the infinite intelligence. Why? Because infinite intelligence is the only intelligence that has the ability to solve anything. It has complete knowledge. It knows how everything works. So then, having had that awareness of the direct experience of that infinite intelligence, and recognizing in the moment, boy, I am again trying to pull myself up by my own bootstraps, and it hurts. Then just do the intelligent thing and say, well, gee whiz, who can solve my problems? Not me. Infinite intelligence can. Well, then I I'm I'm gonna let it. And then the key is you have to trust that it is, because it is, but it won't only if you again step in and try to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. See, if you, or imagine, it's like, if you're trying to drive your car, and every time you grab hold of the steering wheel, you're steering it incorrectly. Take your hands off the wheel, and don't necessarily do this in real life with the car. The car thing is a metaphor, but it's as if every time you grab hold of the steering wheel, you're going the wrong way. And if you would let go, God will take you in the right way. But then you become afraid. You say, oh no, I'm going to crash. Again, I'm not saying take your hands off the steering wheel on your material car in physical reality. Please, if a better metaphor came to me, I would use it, but this is the one that came. But in this metaphor, God will drive your car the right way if you let it. But then you, like most of us, become afraid, and you say, oh no, and you grab hold, and again, you steer it into a ditch. That's what you're used to doing, so you just keep doing it. You can't help yourself. So the key is you have to not do that. And that's possible. You can succeed in that. And this does not mean, by the way, that 3 minutes over, but I just do need to clarify this point, because otherwise some people are going to get confused about this and struggle unnecessarily. I am not saying that you cannot and should not do anything. You cannot help but act. You will act. You will breathe. You will unconsciously beat your heart. You will all these things. But it is actually possible to allow the divine to do all those things through you and as you. And if you would but patiently allow and trust, you will witness that happening. You will see that it is happening. That infinite intelligence is moving through you. It is, in a most basic sense, it is breathing you, which is why simple breath awareness is such a powerful thing. So if you want to know what's a very practical thing that you can do that will allow you to surrender in this way, breath awareness. Just be aware of the breath. Having said that, almost nobody will ever do it. But if you are serious if you're sincere, if you've had enough of the suffering and struggle, then it's possible for you. And you just have to be sincere about it, because there will be so many nuances, so many things that will come up, and your mind will get activated, and it will start thinking and doubting, and it will say, well, I don't know about this, and how can I, and I can't, and all these other things. And what about this hypothetical scenario and edge case here, and what if that, and the other thing, and can I really trust, and am I surrendering now? Should my mind be silent? Am I surrendered if there's thinking happening? All these things will go on. And the truth is, you really just it's a thing, it's a living reality that you have to open to, and you can't have all of the understanding in advance. The understanding comes through the lived experience. And it's a process, so you just have to keep going with it. The more you are willing to go with it, the more it will teach you, the more it will change you, the more it will establish itself in you and as you and through you, so that there will be more smoothness, more coherence, more grace, more ease. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight. It might. It's unlikely. The more you are willing to just sincerely engage with this, it will work. It's the most, as far as I know, it's the most expedient means to the fulfillment of what you really want. So that's it today from me. I hope that that has been valuable to you. For those who are here live, I'm happy to stay on for Q&A in the event that you have anything. I'm going to end this recording now.